Hello book lovers, and welcome back or welcome to Nat Cat's Bookish Cafe. Today I will be going through all the books that I read in the month of November. Alright, so I'm just gonna scooch over real quick so that you can see the little notepad that I made with all my stats for the month. I know that the font I chose is not the best, so sorry if you're having trouble reading it. I will definitely be using a different font next time. I am just going to read off the stats here because Lord knows I did not memorize them all. So I did end up reading a total of 11 books this month. That's a pretty normal number for me to read. I ended up reading 2,534 pages. I only listened to 29.62 hours of audiobooks. It was definitely not an audiobook month for me. The few that I listened to were relatively short. I was just kind of slumping in that format for some reason. But my average rating was a 4.09, so I'm super excited that that was above a 4.0. I'm hoping that my annual average will be above a 4.0. Right now it is at a 3.989, so it's pretty much at a 3.99. So hopefully this month's reading goes really well and I'm able to get above that 4.0 average for the year. I decided to take a look at my age groups that I was reading as well as my genres. I do keep track of that on like an annual scale, but I don't really look at it on a monthly basis. So I was just interested in doing that because I felt like this month I read more YA than I have been for a while, and that does seem to be the case since 5 of the books that I read were YA. One was considered a middle grade. I did put one of them as new adult just because the age span of the characters was so broad and it was listed as both YA and adult on Goodreads. I know usually new adult is more for like college age people, but at some point in the book they were college age, so I just put it as there. And then 4 adult books. As far as genres go, 2 of them would be under historical, 4 of them were under sci-fi, 7 of them had romance themes. Horror was only 1 book. 2 of them were magical realism, 4 were contemporary, and 3 had some sort of mystery or thriller aspect to it. Obviously, I didn't just choose one genre for each book. I just put whatever genre this book could fall under. So this month I'm going to go ahead and do what I did last month, which is starting with my lowest rated book and moving up to my highest rated book. If there are multiple books in a rating range, I will go through them in the order in which I read them. All right, we'll be starting with my lowest rated book, which was 3 stars. So luckily nothing under 3 stars this month. And that is the book A Cat Who Saves Books by Sasuke Natsukawa. So this I listened to as an audiobook, and I will say right away that I was not a huge fan of the narrator, which of course made the experience a little less pleasant. I felt that the voice that he made for the young boy in the story was very annoying, to be honest. It made the character seem a bit weaker, even though I feel like throughout the story, you know, the author was trying to prove that there was strength within the character. I just never was really able to grab onto that because of how weak the narrator made him sound. But in this book, we follow a young high school student who was living with his grandfather in a bookstore, and his grandfather has passed away and left him the bookstore. The teenager was planning on selling this bookstore and moving in with a distant relative, but one day a talking cat shows up and asks him to help him save some books. So they journey to different realms, I guess you could kind of call them. It is a magical realism book. So, you know, they are traveling to places that could definitely be in the real world, but are also just not quite ordinary. And they're dealing with people who have a love for books, but are just not loving them in a very healthy way, in a way that's very good for books. I understand what the author was trying to do, just, you know, kind of trying to show how important it is to respect books, to treat them kindly, to take them as they are and not trying to stuff them into something that's more consumable or more profitable. But I also felt like the themes of the story were pretty basic for someone who is an avid book lover. Like, if you're new to the book community and you're trying to dip your toes into becoming an avid reader, maybe reading this story will make you realize how wonderful books are. But as someone who has already loved books for years and years, the story didn't really give me anything new, and so it was all in the end a bit underwhelming. I did enjoy some of the side characters that were present. I don't have much to say about the writing, so I guess you could say it was pretty basic. This is a translated work, so of course I don't know how well the translation is or anything, but overall I felt it was just a very middle of the road book. For my next read, I will be talking about Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bastarrica. I rated this book 3.5 stars. This was another audiobook that I was listening to, and in fact it was the first audiobook that I was listening to this month, and I think it's really what helped me fall into a slump with audiobooks, because I really struggled to read this because this is a very graphic book. It's very difficult to read, so I could only listen to it like in little chunks at a time. So even though the audiobook is almost, you know, 7 hours, it definitely took me like 10 or so days to actually complete it. This is considered a horror sci-fi. We are in a world where animals have developed some sort of virus, or, you know, have some sort of bacteria or something in them that if humans come in contact with it, they die. So the slaughterhouse industry has completely shut down, and people no longer have access to meat, and due to a lack of food, they turn to cannibalism, and we follow a character who works for one of these slaughterhouses, where humans are bred, raised, and eventually slaughtered. I knew going into the story that it wasn't going to be a very easy read, but this book goes so far beyond just the process of slaughtering meat. It goes into the breeding process, and how gruesome and harmful it is to, in this case, the people that have to go through that. It also talks about the experiments that they're doing on people, since these people that are being bred are not seen as really people, as humans. They are called heads. They have no problem sending them to facilities where they perform gruesome tests on them. So if you do not like body horror, or obviously the mistreatment of humans in any way, you need to stay away from this book, because that is a big theme of this. Our character for the majority of the book hates this industry. His father was the owner of an animal slaughterhouse who lost his mind after they turned to slaughtering humans, and he very much is against what is being done, but it's a necessity. So during this book, we just see him going through all these places where all these terrible things are happening, and walking people through the process, while the whole time being completely disgusted with that, which makes him a pretty interesting character to be in the mind of, because he is very much involved with the process while also very much being against it. Towards the beginning of this book, he is gifted a female head, and keeps her in the barn, but he starts to develop a more illegal relationship with her throughout the story. I thought that storyline was incredibly interesting, especially towards the ending of the book. It took a very unexpected turn. One thing that I did really like about this book, outside of the commentary that was being made about the brutality of the slaughter industry, is the use of a very emotionless writing style. The voice of this story was very distant. You didn't get too many emotions from it, which, considering we were dealing with such a step-by-step process of slaughter, worked really well for the story. One thing that really bothered me came towards the end. I felt like a ton of storylines were opening up towards the end, and then the story just ended. It was kind of like we were reading the prequel to something, and that once you really found something to grasp onto, a part of the story that you're like, okay, things are getting interesting, it just, like, that storyline didn't continue. It was just gone, which made the story seem a little bit incomplete to me. For my third book, we have another audiobook. Obviously, most of my audiobooks are kind of sitting down here in the lower ratings, but that is The Gravity of Us by Phil Stamper. This is a contemporary YA story that follows a young man who seems to have some sort of online presence. I don't know if it's similar to, I don't think it's similar to TikTok. It's kind of like he does lives where he walks around Brooklyn, I think it's where he's from, and just kind of talks about what's going on in the area, whether it's political or just fun events. And he's got a ton of followers there, and he wants to be a reporter, but his father gets selected to be part of a space program, and so they are forced to live in Nashville, Texas, right? Houston, Texas. I was like, Nashville? That's not Houston, Texas. And at this space facility, NASA has made a partnership with a reality TV show in hopes of boosting support for this space program. And so our character is kind of upset that he's being forced onto this reality TV show where they're like against him doing his own reporting. So he starts kind of reporting some of the behind the scenes stuff that is happening with this reality TV show and the way it affects the families, as well as, you know, bringing light to some of the more science-based things that happen at NASA that aren't as based on drama, and that the reality TV shows think is boring, but really is a really big important part of the space program. So I thought that was a really fun concept. It's always nice to see someone who tries to bring awareness to, you know, the real issues at hand rather than just focusing on, you know, what will get the most views. I did not find our character to be the most likable, which is why this book got a little bit of a lower rating. I thought he was a bit self-absorbed. He was very much dealing with his own problems, and for a big part of the story, he had a friend back in Brooklyn, which is hopefully where he was living, that was going through something, and he just wasn't there for her. And I didn't really support that behavior and didn't feel like he did enough to make up for that behavior. We do also have a bit of a male-male romance. The person he's interested does have depression, and I thought that the representation was decent. As someone who doesn't have depression, obviously I can't comment on that too much. I did think that our character tried to be pretty understanding of it, but you could also see that he sometimes has trouble seeing people go through life differently. than he's very much a planner, and the person that he's interested in is just someone who's trying to get through, the day kind of situation, and he kind of struggled with accepting that, but towards the end, he did a bit more, so he did have some character growth. Overall, I thought it was just an interesting, fun, cute YA story that's worth checking out. All right, and on to our first physical book, which is a 4-star, and that is Stalking Jack the Ripper by Carrie Maniscalco. This was on my unhaul project, so I'm super glad that I got to this book because I actually quite enjoyed it. We're following a young woman who wants to be a forensic scientist. And what year is it? The 1800s, I think it is. I might be wrong. I'm always terrible at knowing times in history. But she wants to be a forensic scientist. She comes from a wealthy family whose mother died from a disease, and her father is very overprotective of her because of this. She does spend time working with her uncle, who does autopsies of murder victims, and this is something she really enjoys and wants to go to school for. Shortly after her uncle lets her start sneaking into his classes, the bodies of Jack the Ripper's victims start showing up, and her uncle is the one who is investigating them, so she is able to assist with that. When suspicion turns to her uncle as being the murderer because he's so well versed in the body, and these victims are missing organs and seem to be killed by someone who has at least some medical expertise, she and her uncle's assistant, a handsome young man, of course, set out to try to figure out who the real murderer is. This probably isn't like the most memorable story of all time, but while you're reading it, it is a lot of fun. I found the mystery aspect of it to be very intriguing. I did figure out before it was revealed who the killer was. I felt towards the end the author was pushing one suspect too hard, which usually I feel in a story means that it's not that person and that it's someone else. So I think she should have been a little bit more subtle with trying to get us to believe that this certain person was the killer. Otherwise, I thought there was a good amount of humor in this story and that it balanced really well with the gruesome murders that were being described. And I also really enjoyed the author's writing. So I will definitely be continuing with the story, and I'm excited to watch this slow burn romance come to fruition. Hopefully, I did enjoy watching those two characters banter, but at the same time work together and come closer and closer. The next 4-star is Last Quintesta by Donna Barbara Higuera. This I put as middle grade. It could also be considered like a very low YA story. Our character, I believe, is 12 years old, but it also deals with some darker themes that may not be the best for some younger audiences. This is a sci-fi story that follows a young Hispanic girl as her family gets on a spaceship to travel to a new world because a meteor is heading to strike Earth. So in order to travel to this new world, they have to go into, what is it called? Cryogenic sleep or something for a few 100 years. And the reason her family is on this trip is because her parents are scientists, and so everyone on that ship is a scientist. Everyone that left on a previous ship is like an architect or a farmer, and they left ahead of time to try to prepare the planet for them. And there's supposed to be another ship that is full of like diplomats and politicians, but that ship ends up being destroyed, and so there's no politicians and no diplomats. And so a sort of like cult that was starting to form on Earth ends up taking over the spaceship, thinking that their way of making sure everyone is the same, that everyone is considered equal, that there's nothing to set people apart, is the only way for the human race to survive. The way that this organization keeps control is by brainwashing the people that are in their pods, because the pod while they're in the pods, they were supposed to be absorbing all of these lessons so that when they woke up that they were like experts in some sort of field, and they switched those out to kind of teach them the way that this cult wanted them to think. But there was a glitch in her system. So she is able to remember that they are traveling from Earth, as well as remembering all the stories that her grandmother told us. So this character is a storyteller, and I really enjoyed when she was telling stories, but I felt like it wasn't a big enough part of this story, especially since the synopsis made it seem like that was kind of what was going to allow her to pretty much save the human race from this cult. And it definitely did play a part, but it just was a bit minor, considering how much weight the synopsis put on that aspect of the story. I did enjoy the writing. I thought the writing was really good. I thought for the most part that the pacing of the plot was really well done. For the majority of the book, we had some slower aspects, then something new would be revealed, or a character would be put in, a dangerous situation and would have to maybe change her plans, or would need to try to save someone who doesn't know they need to be saved, kind of situations. So I really enjoyed the pacing for the majority of the book. However, because the pacing was so well for the majority of the book, when the ending came around, it was suddenly very fast. It was like the author had a cutoff date and she spent too much time building up to the ending that she had to rush it. So it seemed like suddenly we had this great pacing, and then it was just like ping. It was just like bang, end of story. The final battle happened, and it was just very anticlimactic, so I couldn't give it a full 5 stars because of that. Another reason I couldn't quite give it 5 stars is that a lot of emotional things happen on the story. We're following a young woman whose family and friends are in danger, who had to leave her world behind, who had to leave her grandmother behind, and yet throughout this book, I felt very few emotions. I think the writing just wasn't able to evoke those in me. Now, looking at this author's previous work, it does seem like this is their first time writing a story for an older audience. So I don't know if they just didn't put enough emotion into it because they're used to writing for people that, don't really pay attention to things like that, that they only care about plot. So hopefully when they write more pieces, they will of course improve on their ability to evoke emotion in their readers. The next 4-star is going to be The Ninth Circus. This was a reread for me. It was also a buddy read. I read this with Amy from A Star Reads, Danielle from Bookara, and Paige from Pages with Paige. I ended up giving this 4 stars, and I can't remember what I gave it the first time. I would say the first time I read it, it probably fell around a 3-star. So while I did enjoy it a bit more than the first time, it still didn't suck me in as much as I was hoping it would. I was kind of hoping that the writing would impress me a bit more because I pay more attention to writing these days, and Erin Morgenstern is just really known for her writing. But I mean, I read this entire book with my tabs at the ready and I didn't mark a single page. That's not to say the writing isn't, you know, gorgeous. You know, she does have a very pleasant writing style. It's just not the kind of writing style where I read a sentence and it just, you know, it sticks with you or anything like that. This is a magical realism story set in a historical setting. We are following two young magicians who are battling each other, and the battlefield is this really incredible circus. I think the circus is the most interesting character of the story. Being able to learn about the individual tents throughout the story was definitely what captured my attention the most. I never felt overly connected to the characters. I don't find them to be the most likable. Marco, the male magician, I feel seems to take out his anger for a situation on people around him who have nothing to do with it. Of course, the person that he wants to be angry at is never around, so I do understand his frustration, but at the same time I feel like it's very unfair to those who care about him. As far as Celia goes, I do think she's an interesting character, but for some reason I feel like we just don't focus on her enough. She seems to be almost a secondary character to Marco, so I definitely would have liked to spend more time with her, especially since she is actually part of the circus while Marco is more outside of it. We do also follow a third character whose name I can't remember right now, but I really enjoyed his aspect. He was a little bit younger and befriends a couple of the children in the Ninth Circus, and being able to explore the circus through the eyes of a younger character was probably my favorite aspect. The story at times is a little bit too slow, so sometimes you're dragging your feet through it a little bit, but I do think that the ending is very intriguing, and that towards the end I definitely didn't want to put it down until we completed. For our final 4-star, we have the final audiobook that I finished literally on November 30th. And that is The Darkness Outside Us by Elliot Schreifer. So this book is a little difficult for me to talk about because around the halfway point there is a pretty massive reveal that kind of changes the trajectory of the story completely. So I'm gonna kind of vaguely talk about it because obviously I don't want to give any spoilers. So in this book, we follow from the point of view of a young astronaut. I think they're about 17 years old, and he is on a mission to save his sister, who has sent out a rescue beacon after something goes wrong with her mission to the moon of some planet. I can't remember where she was. Maybe the moon of Mars, Saturn, one of those guys. Anyway, so he is on this spaceship. He wakes up, he can't remember the launch, and he feels like crap. And while he is trying to recoup from his waking up, he finds out that there is someone else on the spaceship. At this point in the world has kind of split into two large powers, and it seems that for this mission, the world thought it was necessary to send one person from each of those two powers, and he and this character start to form a bond together because they're trapped in space, you know, just the two of them. What else are they gonna do? So I did think the relationship aspects of it were interesting. Their relationship changes a lot throughout the story. So it was kind of interesting seeing them in different stages of their relationship. There was also some mystery aspects to the story where maybe they don't know the full story or the full scope of the mission that they have been placed in. The main thing really is that twist towards the middle. I think the first 35% of the book were like a solid 3-star read, but then once you get past that 50% mark, that part one of the story, it really takes off and in my opinion gets a lot more interesting. Obviously I can't talk too much about that part of the story, but I do suggest that if you pick up this story, that even if towards the beginning you're like, this might be a little boring, to at least give it till part 2 to give your final judgment. All right, moving on to the 4.5 ratings. I have 2 books this month, and the first is The Martian by Andy Weir. This was a 5-star prediction, and it was almost there, but not quite. This story follows, is his name Mark? Yeah, it's Mark. And he was left behind on Mars after a windstorm left his crew thinking that he had died. So he is on the mission of trying to stay alive until the next mission shows up and can hopefully pick him up and bring him back to Earth. This story is incredibly science heavy, but Andy Weir does a really good job of kind of dumbing it down for us. The way he sets this up for the most part is that Mark is keeping logs of his day, kind of his activities, what his goals are, his thought process of how to get to the next stage of his rescue mission, things like that. And Mark is hoping that not just people at NASA will read this, but that people all over the world will hear a story. So he is definitely speaking as if he's speaking to a common citizen such as myself. So he is dumbing it down for them. We also get to see the point of view as NASA, or from NASA, as they realize that Mark is still alive and they are scrambling to find a way to either get more supplies to him or get a rescue mission to him sooner than, I don't know, like the 4 years they were initially expecting it to take. We also get some points of view from his crew members as they find out that they accidentally left a living crewmate on a desolate, planet. So there's definitely a lot of interesting things going on here. For some people, they might find the story a bit boring maybe, but I for some reason thought that the pacing of the story was really well done. We follow him as he's repairing things and growing things and complaining about things, and then suddenly there's a dangerous situation and it kind of gets your adrenaline going because what if he dies? But overall I found the story almost relaxing in a way. If you kind of like watching like DIY Network, or I guess they're called Magnolia Network now, where people go into a house and they're like, this is what we're gonna do, this is what we're gonna repair, this is why we're gonna repair it, and what the goal is. And it's just kind of like taking you through steps of things that need to be done, why this will work, why this won't work. And I just found it a little bit relaxing. There were sometimes where it got bogged down a little bit with the science, where if you've been reading it for a long time, it just got to be a bit too much. So I kind of wish that we had maybe one more point of view of someone that was in no way related to science, maybe just a regular civilian, on what their opinions were. There were a few scenes where of course NASA was talking to the press, and I think that was the author's attempt of giving us a little break from science. but it was just not quite enough for me. But overall, really enjoyed this book and ended up watching the movie again because of it, and that was a lot of fun as well. And my second 4.5 star was Birthday by Meredith Russo. So Meredith is a trans woman, and in this book we are following a trans character as well. This was a book that was gifted to me by a friend a couple years ago, and I'm really glad that I was able to get to it in my birthday month, no less, so yay. So this is a contemporary YA story. We're following two characters who were born on the same day, and their families were then snowed into the hospital during a storm for a few days, and they have been best friends ever since. We start following them on their 13th birthday because Morgan starts to realize then that these feelings that they've been having for a few years are getting stronger and stronger, and that they are no longer happy identifying as a male. We also follow Eric, who's Morgan's best friend, and he is struggling with his home life. His brothers are a bit, bullying him, and his father is very controlling, and his mother is not very happy in the situation either. We follow them, 13th birthday, 14th, 15th, 16th through their 18th birthday as they just kind of grow into the people that they want to be. I really enjoyed both of these characters. I really liked that Eric kind of stuck to his guns with the kind of person that he wanted to be. He didn't let his father bully him into being someone that he just couldn't respect. He stayed by Morgan's side, even though Morgan was going through a lot of difficult things and wasn't communicating why he was having such a hard time with Eric until the very end of the story. And Morgan's story was, very heartbreaking. She was dealing with a lot of mental health issues because she was living as a boy and trying to prove to herself that that's who she was, but eventually she decides that she can't live like that at all. And they do live in a small town that is unfortunately very homophobic, so it is a bit dangerous for them to live their life as the way they want, but luckily they have Eric there to be very supportive. Morgan is also dealing with the death of their mother, who had passed away a year or two before their 13th birthday. So just a lot of hard things coming at them at one time. I thought the trans rep was done really well. Obviously, it's different for every single person. Some people have an easier time, some people have a harder time, some people don't make it out on the other side. But our character, it was just really great to see them and their strength as they just really fought to be their best selves and to live the happy life that they deserve to live. So really great trans rep and friendship rep in here, and highly recommend if you are looking for a contemporary YA romance with queer rep. All right, so the last two books are 5-star reads, and the first one is The Charm Offensive by Allison Cotran. I did read this in a vlog along with The Martian, so I will go ahead and put that up there so you can see some of my deeper thoughts on this book. I'm not going to go too into it just because I did discuss it a lot in that vlog, but this is a male contemporary romance that is set on a reality TV show. One of our characters is to be this year's Prince Charming, and the other one is to be his handler, and they are working together to kind of overcome Charlie's awkwardness. Charlie does suffer from an anxiety disorder as well as OCD, and so being in this new situation is very difficult for him. Dev is really good at his job and connects really well with Charlie throughout this story. And the two of them become even closer as they try to work through their separate issues. Dev does suffer from depression, and I felt that the depression rep in this book was really well done, as well as Charlie's OCD and anxiety representation. This story was very emotional at times. It did make me tear up a couple of times, and I really had a lot of fun with it. I thought the setting of the story just was really interesting, and that they balanced fun moments out really well with more heavier moments. I enjoyed the side characters that were present in the story as well. I thought they added a lot to the story. There was a lot of different types of representation in here, from racial representation, sexuality, mental health issues, things like that. So I think the author did a really good job of adding those all in naturally. But overall, the story just really lived up to the hype, and I suggest anyone who hasn't read it yet gets to it. And for my final 5-star, which was actually also my final physical book of the month, we have The Iron Widow by Sharon J. Zhao. And this book was not initially on my November TBR, which, by the way, I finished. I didn't really mention that in my December TBR, but I'm mentioning it now so I don't have to take a punishment in January. This book I chose for the fantasy prompt of disability rep after I couldn't find my initial book that I was hoping to read, and boy am I glad that I ended up picking this book up. Now this is more sci-fi than fantasy. Going into that, I pretty quickly realized it, but you know, oh well. We are following a young female character who lives out kind of like in the farmlands, and her sister was killed when she was sent to the army to help pilot one of these, what are they called? Chrysalists, I think is what they're called. And the way the chrysalists work is that there are two pilots, the yin and the yang, the man and the woman. And the men often end up draining so much of the women's chi that the women end up dying, and that is what happened to her sister. She signs up to become the co-pilot to the male pilot that ended up killing her sister as a revenge, and in hopes of changing the system, because she's like, it's absolutely ridiculous that we are killing so many women in this war. She is quickly named the Iron Widow after she kills her male pilot. This is a female that is able to drain the chi of men instead of the other way around, and are seen as incredibly dangerous and unlikable. She is then partnered with another pilot, the strongest of all the pilots, who is known as a criminal who killed his father and brothers. They set off to fight against these aliens that have come to their planet to collect a certain resource, and end up being a super powerhouse of a partnership. While they're battling these aliens, they're also battling those that are supposed to be supporting them, because they're seen both as criminals and no one really wants them around, but they need them around. And they're really taking advantage of their position of, you know, this powerful force to try to make changes to the world. There is a beginning of a polyamorous couple in here. She does have a friend that she knew from before she joined the army, who ends up showing up to help her kind of fight off all these people that are trying to like kill her, and her, the pilot, and this friend end up forming a really strong bond that was just so exciting to watch. I was just like watching them come closer together, and I was like, y'all together are just chef's kiss. I love you all. The character is so strong. She is disabled because she is the victim of foot binding, and that is discussed throughout the story as part of the way that the society oppresses women and makes them feel like they need to rely on men. I just think that the author did a great job balancing the action that comes with being at war with an alien race with the, you know, political and social revolution that our character is trying to bring about. The ending of the story was absolutely bonkers. I was like reading the end, you know, I suspected something. I honestly suspected the route that the author took, but I didn't like, I was like, are they actually gonna do that? And they did. So that is pretty crazy, but the ending of this book was spectacular. I was telling my mom, I was like, I can't believe I have to wait until January to read the next book because, you know, I already decided my December TBR, but then I checked and the next book's not even coming out until August of next year. I'm so sad. I have a feeling that I might end up rereading this book just because 8 months is like, or actually like 9 months, if not 10 months, is quite a long time in between books, but I have no problem revisiting this incredible story. It is based on Chinese history. Obviously it's fictionalized or anything, but I do often enjoy a East Asian setting for sci-fi and fantasy stories. So 5 out of 5, actually my favorite book of the month. All right, guys, so here are the physical books that I read this month. It was a pretty good reading month. I enjoyed a lot of the books that I read. Let me know down below what your favorite and least favorite book of the month were. As always, thank you so much for supporting my channel, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!